Dario Gentili is a professor of philosophy at the University of Roma Tre, and he is a co-founding member of the Italian Walter Benjamin Association. And among his works, we can recall, for example, Il Tempo della Storia, The Time of History, about quite a commentary on the thesis on the concept of history. But he also worked on themes like crisis and government, and most recently is co-editor of the work Walter Benjamin and Antonio Gramsci and Recent Encounter.
Thank you, Giulia, and for the presentation, and of course for the invitation, and Martin also for the organization of this workshop. So I don't want. I want to be in time. So Poverty and Misery, Boheme as a subaltern group. A quick search in the dictionaries is enough to note that most languages have two terms, as in English misery and poverty, in Italian miseria e povertà. It's the same for French, and in German Elend and Armut, that over the time have to come up to overlap and blur, thus losing a difference in meaning and significance that was substantial. To recover this difference, I go back to ancient Rome, where three were even the terms in Latin that articulated a condition that we today generically define as poverty. The miser was someone in a state of extreme poverty. The inops, the second term, was one who was without means, both in the material sense and in the broader sense of capacity. And pauper, the third term, was someone who, although forced to live a very sober lifestyle, nevertheless retained a certain decorum and dignity. At first glance, it might seem that these terms represent different degrees within a single quantitative and material scale, from the poorest to the least poor, from the least endowed to the most endowed with the means to survive. However, there is also a qualitative difference. The inops and the pauper certainly share an economic dimension. The former lacks the material means or capabilities to become independent and autonomous. His is a substantially servile condition from which it is difficult to escape. According to the etymology of the term, the latter produces little, this is poverty, but by increasing production, he can rise from his condition and ascend the economic and consequently social ladder. This indicates that paupertas does not necessarily correspond to a servile and submissive condition like that of inops. Moreover, it can be temporary and contingent. However, the pauper can equally be reduced to the state of inops if forced to become the servant of others to survive. That poverty in the Roman world was a sort of economically quantified threshold. The condition of the pauper is thus a threshold state which can cause him to degrade to inops, but can also be overcome, leading him out of poverty. It depends on his ability to increase his productivity through work. Inops has the potential to work, but his work is strictly dependent on the means to production he lacks. In short, the difference between pauper and inops is related to work. If pauper and inops fall within the economic dimension of work and are only differentiated by its forms and methods, the condition of the miser is an absolute state with no way out. It is not defined by a lack, whether in production, means, or capabilities. Unlike the pauper and the inops, the miser finds in work neither compensation for a deficiency nor a criterion of meaning and measurement, that threshold that can be crossed. In the Christian Middle Age, the misery is the closest to God, a proximity that, until early modernity, it shared with the absolute sovereign. Although from two opposite poles, the sovereign and the miserable share both absoluteness and uncompensability, a disproportion that exceeds work and the form of economy based on it. Walter Benjamin probably first became aware of misery, of this misery as distinct from poverty and in its own way sovereign, during his stay in southern Italy in 1924. In particular, in Naples, he recognized a form of life, that of misery, that is not lacking on the basis of parameters of economic measurement, thus enabling the production of poverty and the activation of those compensatory dispositives that govern it. It is a different form to the poverty he knew, the one that fell upon Germany with inflation, which he writes about in those same years in Kaiser Panorama of Einbahnstraße. It's the first quote on slide. The latter is a poverty that has become inordinate and therefore incompensable through work, a poverty that has blown every parameter out of proportion and has trespassed into utter misery. This panorama, the first one, is desolating. The quote, where there was work that fed a man, there was also poverty that did not disgrace him if it arose from deformity of other misfortune, but this deprivation into which millions are born and hundreds of thousands are dragged by impoverishment does indeed bring disgrace. Filth and misery grow up around them like walls, the work of invisible hands. End of quote. The panorama that in those same years the misery of Naples shows to Benjamin, he instead renders in very similar terms, but with an opposite tone. Here, misery is no longer represents the most extreme and irretrievable degradation of poverty, but rather a form of life that participates as a sovereign to the panorama. I quote from Naples with Asja Lacis, even the most miserable existence is sovereign in the dim, dual awareness of participating in all his destitution in one of the pictures of Neapolitan street life that will never return, and of enjoying in all his poverty the leisure to follow the great panorama. End of quote. Naples represents the experience for a metropolis where it is misery with its porosity that shapes urban space, blowing up the bourgeois boundary between public and private, thus configuring a threshold space where alternative forms of life can flourish, not in a subordinate position, but in autonomy and potentially aspire to become hegemonic in metropolitan life. I quote, misery, thus Elend, has brought about a stretching of frontiers that mirrors the most radiant freedom of thought, Geistesfreiheit. End of quote. My hypothesis is that Benjamin in Naples began to elaborate a difference between poverty, Armut, and misery, Elend. Even in Germany, in fact, we find a difference between poverty and misery that goes back to their respective etymology. If Armut refers to a lack of productivity that can be compensated by work, Elend indicates a condition of such extreme poverty that it is incompensable, so much so that etymologically it refers to being, quote, alien, extraneous to a certain territory and order, end of quote. It is that poverty of experience in which lack cannot be compensated for by a new experience, but, as he argues in Erfahrung und Armut of 1933, entails, quote, to free from experience. Therefore, the new poor long for a world in which they can make such pure and decided use of their poverty, their outer poverty, and ultimately also their inner poverty, that it will lead to something respectable, end of quote. In short, the current misery is that extreme that refers to the opposite extreme of liberation, of a society in which misery is reversed into sovereignty. Gramsci also reflects in Notebook 22, Americanism and Fordism, on the so-called mystery of Naples. Quote, Goethe was right to demolish the legend of the organic vagabondry, lazzaronismo in Italian, of Neapolitans, and to point out that, on the contrary, they are very active and industrious. But the question consists in examining the actual result of their industry. It is not in itself productive, nor is it directed towards satisfying the needs and demands of the productive classes. End of quote. If this activity without productivity of the Neapolitans for Gramsci represents an obstacle to progress and modernization, being part of those viscous parasitic sedimentations that hinder the affirmation of Fordism and its rationalization. For Benjamin, on the contrary, in this same activity without productivity in the Fordist sense, consists the cipher with which he sifts through the metropolitan life of 19th century Paris. Benjamin worked at the Passagenwerk during his Parisian exile, during which he experienced poverty and job precariousness at first hand. This condition becomes clear to him at the time of another stay in southern Europe, on his second visit to Ibiza in the spring and summer of 1933, where he was dubbed as miserable by the local inhabitants. While Walter Benjamin's miserable appearance was undoubtedly influenced by the economic hardships he faced, having recently abandoned his hopes of securing a university position and his anxiety about the bleak prospects of exile as a Jewish-Marxist, Germany was reeling from the aftermath of 1929 economic collapse and Hitler's rise. The nickname also bestowed upon him an element of eccentricity, probably due to the fact that, unlike the equally poor islanders, he apparently did not work, but wandered, meditated, took notes, and wrote. As his correspondence from this period testifies, Benjamin was actively experimenting with and living out a new way of life, which he had discovered during his stays in Mediterranean Europe. Living by experience and day-to-day survival not only characterized Walter Benjamin's existence in 30s Paris as a freelance ante litteram, but also formed the basis of the lifestyle he sought to unearth in the Paris of advanced capitalism during the 19th century. This way of life took shape during Baron Haussmann's urban planning revolution and found expression in the poetics of Charles Baudelaire. Besides being a biographical and existential fact of that period, misery represents a structural element of his Passagenwerk. It is a pole of its dialectic. It is the dialectic image as the reverse of a liberation that is realized in awakening. Quote, thesis and antithesis must be grasped together in the image that is transfigured in the dream. The aspects of splendor and misery of the passage are a dreamlike vision. Dialectical shift in synthesis is awakening. End of quote. In Passagenwerk, however, misery also plays a fundamental role in Benjamin's analysis of modes of production and their transformation. It is this aspect in particular that I would like to focus on. Benjamin explores how the metropolitan pace of life conditioned the crowds of the modern metropolis for the repetitive and serial work typical of Fordist factory assembly lines. But not only that. Benjamin offers glimpses of a post-Fordist critique within Marx's contemporary criticism of capitalism, which sprang from the Fordist production model. In his study of the 19th century revolutions in France, Benjamin highlights how Louis Bonaparte's counter-revolution with the establishment of the Second Empire shattered the alliance forged on the barricades of 1848 between the proletariat led by Louis-Auguste Blanqui and the Boheme, a counterculture movement opposed to bourgeois norms that had emerged from the city slums and counted figures like Baudelaire among its ranks. Benjamin reviews the characters that populate it: the flaneur, the idler, the professional conspirator, the gambler, the night owl, the detective, the rag picker, the prostitute, the poet, and the artist. This is the same Boheme towards which Marx expresses a very severe judgment: scum, offal, refuse of all classes, since he recognizes in it a fundamental ambiguity that makes it susceptible of the flattery of power, while also being irreducible to belonging to any specific social class. I read it's not complete in the slide, but anyway, quote, alongside decayed roué with dubious means of subsistence and dubious origin, alongside ruined and adventurous offshoots of the bourgeoisie, were vagabonds, discharged soldiers, discharged jailbirds, escaped gallery slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazzaroni, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, maquereau pimps, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, thinkers, beggars, in short, the whole indefinite, disintegrated mass thrown hither and thither, which the French call la bohème. End of quote. Benjamin perceives that Napoleon III's counter-revolution was facilitated by an advanced form of capitalism that, while partly anticipating Fordism, also foreshadowed a new market capitalism. This new capitalism exploited alternative lifestyles that were often associated with extreme misery and rejected traditional factory work accessible to the poor. In Baudelaire's Paris, quote, there was the pedestrian who wedged himself into the crowd, but there was also the flaneur, who demanded elbow room and was unwilling to forego the life of a gentleman of leisure. His leisurely appearance as a personality is his protest against the division of labor, which makes people into specialists. It is also his protest against their industriousness. End of quote. After the alliance with the proletariat was broken, the counterculture of the Bohème found itself vulnerable to the commercialization, transforming the refusal of work into a form of marketable labor. Quote, the flaneur now truly epitomized the commodification of leisure. His strolls were monetized, and his observations of the market were suddenly transformed into a job. End of quote. And precisely that idleness, condemned by the work ethic that profitless activities represented, falls within the productivity regime. Quote, basic to flânerie, among other things, is the idea that the fruits of idleness are more precious than the fruits of labor. End of quote. The activity of the idle does not find its remuneration in the increasingly uniform wages paid to workers. Yet, the value attributed to eccentricity, originality, and creativity ends up becoming marketable. However, this value operates on a different level than that by which the relationship between time and work is determined and quantified. Idleness, distinct from the free time away from work, embodies the desire to live day to day and by expedience, a lifestyle excluded from the satisfaction of needs ensured by conventional work. This is why, in its various forms and expression up to the present day, misery often evokes contempt, resentment, or even outright hatred. It elicits ambivalent feelings because it rejects the redemption through work, and the poor seeks. Work with many of those who hate misery would actually prefer to do without. The market seeks to govern and profit from desire by promising satisfaction to it. It is called enjoyment. This concept offers the diverse individuals comprising the bohème, the fulfillment of desires that remain inaccessible in factory or white-collar work. Baudelaire, who had once joined Blanqui in the barricades of 48, distanced himself from the rebellious masses and assumed increasingly reactionary positions. Ultimately, he viewed the Paris Commune of 1871 with aristocratic contempt, despite sharing certain characteristics with his own bohemian experiences. Evidently, as Benjamin argues, the exchange offered by the market, enjoyment in exchange for the renunciation of power, appeared to be a favorable bargain, but in the end it turned out to be a way for the bohème to leave misery behind and enter the ranks of poverty. Quote, inevitably, one day many of its members of Bohème had to become aware of the commodity nature of their labor power. But this day had not as yet come. Until that day, they were permitted, if one may put it that way, to pass their time. The very fact that they share could at best be enjoyment, but never power, made the period which history gave them a space for passing time. End of quote. It is not so much in the Fordist factory that the labor power of Baudelaire and the Bohemians will find its form of commodification. Rather, it seems to refer to another mode of production which will take over from the Fordist one, the post-Fordist mode of production. Post-Fordism that in fact buys labor power with enjoyment in exchange for desire. And it is precisely this desire that is expressed in an activity without productivity. And it is in it that Benjamin recognized the power of labor power, the same power that poses a threat to capitalist order. It is no coincidence that Baudelaire himself, in The Painter of Modern Life, claims for himself as an artist, for his activity without productivity, a kind of basic income, not only because he is at risk of poverty, but above all because he is a member of a new aristocracy that as such does not have to work. And yet, for Benjamin, Baudelaire is also a figure of misery. Indeed, he argues that Baudelaire recognized himself in the rag picker, which, quote, is the most provocative figure of human misery. Lumpenproletarier in a double sense, clothed in rags and occupied with rags, end of quote. The misery of Baudelaire and the Bohemians is both a material condition and a source of artistic inspiration. It is what defines them as outsiders to both working class labor and the order of bourgeoisie citizenship. Indeed, this misery is poor insofar as it is clothed in rags, but it is also that which can create with rags an activity. If the poor man is called upon to redeem his condition with work, shedding his rags to aspire to bourgeoisie clothes, the rags of misery remains so, representing a desire without satisfaction, without bourgeoisie enjoyment. After all, in the Symposium, Plato describes Eros as a ragamuffin. And, to come to the present day, a ragamuffin is also the one who set fire to Michelangelo Pistoletto's Venus of the Rags installation in Piazza Municipio in Naples in 2023, evidently not tolerating that rags can be redeemed and elevated to beauty, if beauty is represented by its canon par excellence, that of Venus. Benjamin concludes on some motif in Baudelaire by arguing that Baudelaire is, quote, a star without atmosphere, that his star does not find its own atmosphere in his era, that of the Second Empire. Baudelaire and with him the Bohemians ended up being subjected to the initiatives of the ruling class, which assigned market value to their way of life, making it a reproducible and marketable lifestyle. Rather, Baudelaire's star would have shined in its own atmosphere if that of 1848, when he was on the barricades with the Blanquist proletariat, had been, in Gramsci's words, a permanent victory and not just a temporary revolt and insurrection. No, this is impossible to read. I'm quoting the famous Gramscian passage on the history of subaltern social groups from Notebook 25. I'm posing the question of whether the Bohemians can be part of the history of subaltern groups as Gramsci intended it. For Gramsci, that the Boheme could take the initiative in unifying the subaltern groups and take their leadership can certainly be ruled out. As was already the case for Marx, the Bohemians' activity without productivity, insofar as it is individualized and not class composable, makes it susceptible to the initiative of the ruling class, remain in a passive and subaltern position. As he notes in Americanism and Fordism, for Gramsci the Bohemian is fundamentally a layabout. Benjamin, on the other hand, considers it a decisive task for a communist politics to give Baudelaire's star an atmosphere, so that his activity without productivity is not then captured by capitalist mode of production and made productive. There remains, I think, an open problem, that of the alliance between countercultures, this is also how one can define Bohemia, and organized class-based labor. It came up again in the 70s. Mark Fisher considered it in exactly these terms in Post-Capitalist Desire. Quote Fisher, a newly emergent Bohemian class in the late 60s developed the notion that you can both work less and determine your own needs and satisfactions. End of quote. This was the space of counterculture, which, sharing the refusal of factory work with the working class, aspired to make the desire for an activity without productivity hegemonic. This is how Fisher expresses the 60s alliance between counterculture and the working class. Quote, why should not this Bohemia be open to everyone? End of quote. We are now probably at the point of exasperation today of that phase whose origin Benjamin glimpsed in the 19th century Paris. Indeed, we are currently in the West in an era where the incorporation of desire into work results in diminishing enjoyment and increasing psychic suffering. This situation has reached a nearly unsustainable point for individuals due to the frustration stemming from the lack of return on investment of desire in one's work. This constitutes the most desperate form of misery today, misery without desire. Thank you.
Thank you. And there are any comments, questions? You want to?
Who wants to start? Maybe a very simple point. Just
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, you don't have any more this.
Yes. So many things, but first of all, thank you a lot for this very dense and clarifying paper. It never really occurred to me that the point on Armut and poverty should be actually really read with the Neapel's essay and of Elend and misery. In terms of political strategy, and we had just talked about the destructive impetus of avant-garde bourgeoisie, also fighting its own commodification, using also poverty as a negative state of privation in a positive, destructive character style way. Can you point out again the political trajectories again, and also in terms of analysis and strategy of the duality or the pairing of poverty and misery, just from the beginning, just very briefly?
Yeah. No, it's not necessary.
Of
Yeah. Thank you, Sami. So I started from Latin and from Rome because it was very, very clear there these three terms, no? Miser, inops, and pauper. And it's interesting because pauper is a kind of mobile situation. No? It's not defined one for all in his position in society. No? Poverty is something that you can, from which you can go out. No? There is a way out, but the condition is about work, about productivity. Etymologically, pauper means a condition in which the productive is not so much. You have to increase your production. No? So it's strictly related to an economic sense. So, inops is also a condition related to productivity, but in this case it's a question of a lack of capabilities. So the condition of inops is a servile condition, because you need a master that can give you the means to survive. It's not the case of pauper. Pauper is, in Latin word, it's not a degraded condition. No? There is also a recognizing positive condition. The question is about miser. Miser is a condition of extreme poverty. You are without any possible to increasing your condition, and so to go out to this condition. It's an absolute. Etymologically, also, it's the term miser absolute term, not like sovereign. No? It is the upper and the bottom in the reverse point of view. So it's interesting. In this research, I focus also with Foucault history of madness, and during the modernity, is very interesting because in Middle Age this discrimination about work between miser and pauper, it was not so clear. And with the great say interment in this chapter in Histoire de la Folie of Foucault, there in the hospital for they built it in this age, it was a discrimination between the poor that can work and the other. And in this time it produced also a moral judgment on the miser, on the miserable. So it started this story in this time, in modernity, this discrimination between the poor that can work, no? It became the new labor power for the new industries in the centuries, the center of industrial revolution. And on the other side, it's this inappearance of the miserable condition. No? It's only a moral judgment, and because it's people that they won't not work. So it's interesting because, and then I pass to Naples, and then this time of 19th century, it's a condition that of misery that it's kind of activity without production. No, there is no kind of redemption from the miserable through work. But anyway, it's interesting for me because Benjamin tried to recognize a kind of activity without productivity, that is of Bohemia or flaneur and so on. And he understands that this kind of activity without productivity is captured in that time from this market capitalism. It's not yet for this mode of production, but anything else, something else. So this is my distinction between, the distinction is about the function of work, that it works about poverty and it doesn't work on misery, but it's important to say that that of miserable is also a kind of activity.
Thank you. And well, just it would seem like as if the Boheme were always struggling between this misery, which would allow it to conserve its alternative way of life, and the falling into capitalist market and commodification of the same activity. So in order the culture to remain counterculture, it has not to be internal to the logic of capitalism. And the problem would be that, okay, but it would remain misery in a way which would not allow people to survive in most of the cases, apart from some fortunate cases. And it recalls to me, for example, if I think a case of counterculture, punk culture, no? So the refrain was like, okay, you have to make your own compact disc without major records or something like that, but nobody knows the message you want to deliver. And so also the new way, style of life that you want to share. But if people come to know you, it is because you are already sold out. You sold yourself to the market. So can we think a way through for example, I was wondering if we can read this with what Benjamin says in the essay, the author as producer. So when you want to propose something different, you have to, in a way, be within the same system you want to struggle, but at the same time changing with your own activity the relations of production that you find yourself in.
Thank you, Giulia. The question is not so far away from the Sami's paper, no? The a kind of alliance between social movements or artistic movements and the political organization. That's all. I think that for Benjamin reflected on the what could be happened if the revolution of 1848, when Baudelaire and Blanqui were on the same side, would be successful. That is the question. And then he analyzed what happened because this revolution was failed. That is the question. And now, of course, because this revolution was failed, this alliance was broken, Benjamin analyzed the way in which capitalism captured this form of life that remains, as he said about Baudelaire, without atmosphere. So, as you said, at the end, the more radical counterculture become to be nihilist or destructive. No, this kind of rebellion or revolt against the system is the cipher of the counterculture until today. And Benjamin tried to think if this kind of revolt can be involved into a revolution, no? In a positive way, not as a only destructive rebellion and so on, but in an atmosphere that could recognize this kind of activity. So we have to think, and I think that Benjamin, it is typical of his conception of history, posed the same question about the alliance in Paris in the 18th century between Baudelaire and Blanqui. At his time, is it still possible? It is the question about surrealism. It's the same question. Is possible this kind of alliance between the counterculture, the counter movements, and the political communist organization? And I think that the issue remains open. So we have to see what you say is the effect of this failure from which we begin. This is the point of view of Benjamin, I think.
Thank you, Dario, for the presentation. I was just thinking about bringing another concept to this constellation, which is the Hegelian rabble, so the Pöbel, plebe, so plebs, which may, I mean, so what I was thinking is that I remember just that Hegel was quoting Lazzaroni in relation to the plebes, but I had to go back to the text to see that indeed he quotes the Lazzaroni, and he also makes this distinction when he says that poverty in itself does not reduce people to a rabble. So the idea is that it's not poverty that per se creates rabbles. I mean, of course, it's connected to it, but then rabble is something else, which speaks of a specific relation to work. So the impossibility for the rabble to be able to live out of its own work activity, like the miserable somehow. But at the same time, for Hegel, there's also a strong characterization of the lack of honor or integrity. So there's a strong moral condemnation of the rabble. Maybe it's also a sort of effect of the headache that the rabble creates in terms of like the unresolvable contradiction of his political economy. But then I was thinking, so yeah, maybe one thing is if the miserable or in Benjamin can be somehow connected to the rabble. So if there's a way in which we can think that there is similarity, because there is this relation to labor, which is on the one hand, work is not enough to allow the rabble to live. There's maybe not a refusal of work. This is not something that appears so clear to me, but maybe I could reread the text to understand to what extent the rabble is refusing to work or is just left out from the possibility of being connected to the productivity of civil society. And then the other thing I was wondering, since you were very clear about the 48, the barricades where Blanqui and Baudelaire were on the same side. What if that was successful? And going back to Marx's quote, which is also very judgmental, a bit like Hegel in terms of what is this Boheme or what could be the Lumpenproletariat, that I guess for Marx it's not so much a moral judgment. I mean, it maybe there's some moralistic element in it, but there's also the sort of political corruptibility. So the miserable or the Lumpenproletariat could be on the right side, but could also be on the wrong side, so to say. So I guess that it's not just their morality, it's rather their a sort of political fragility or political corruptibility that make them, I don't know how to say it, that does not allow to think them of a revolutionary subject, no matter the sort of antagonistic relation that they entertain with the status quo, precisely because their location can be easily moved. So can really travel from one side to the other side of the barricade. I mean, I don't know, it's just a fact, it's not really a question. The question could be, can we think the rebel as the miserable? So can we connect those? And at the same time, what do you think about this judgment or this condemnation of the miserable, this political condemnation that from Marx, I think, comes from this idea of their political corruptibility?
Yeah. I have it. No, about the first question, thank you, Jamila. Yes, I think that the rabble, the plebe, is involved in my discourse. No, you have to think. I think about it in this moment that plebe in rabble in Roman world was a political subjectivity in a certain point. We can think today about Rancière, no? Yeah, exactly.
Class configuration kind of.
Exactly. But the pauper is really a strictly economic subject or form of life in any way. No, so I think that in rubber there is poor, but it's not the same because plebe became is recognized as a political subjectivity in a certain point. So the question is maybe to think the potentiality not about the poor because they are related really to an economic system, so they are within this system, they can contestate this disorder. But it's interesting to think about this etymological meaning of misery, to be alien, to be without the order. And maybe it's the same situation of plebe, until the moment they fight. And so we know, I think about Rancière, the mésentente, no? They build a new order. It's not a way to involve in the old order, but it's the building of a new order for Rancière, no? And the claim of plebe. About Marx is exactly what it's also about Gramsci. Gramsci has the same judgment of Marx about Lazzaroni, about miserable, and it's what happened also today. No, this individualized work, this kind of impossibility or difficulty to compose a class, it's today the same. No, they are susceptible to the money, no, to be bought from the capitalist mode of production. It what happened. So I don't know if it's in this misery there is a possibility of a revolution. I want to leave the question open, and I think it's the problem also today. No, it's.
Sorry, no, just to follow up. In Benjamin, do you think there is a similar skepticism? Because on the one hand, for what you reconstructed, what you said, it seems that this excess of the miserable is somehow valued for what it represents, but at the same time, there is an awareness that this commodification of labor over their lifestyle is also at stake. So I'm wondering where Benjamin stands in relation to the miserable, what kind of political characterization you think he has of the miserable?
I think that for Benjamin, it's the question. It's the question. It's an open question, but it's also a Marxist question. Maybe something that Marxism has leave clear, no, open maybe. I think that for Benjamin is very important how to involve in the revolution the question of desire, the question of individuals, the question of a kind of activity without work, a kind of. We can find this question maybe in the 70s, no? To how to think. In Mark Fisher terms, how to make desirable the revolution. This is the question for Benjamin also.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you were first.
No,
I have spoken already, so
I'll be very
after you.
I'll be very quick. Could we go back to that photograph of Michelangelo Pistoletto?
Sì.
Because I was very struck by that example. And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you were, interpreting what happened, basically. So is there something here about a sort of monetization or marketization of the Lazzarone Napoletano, or that kind of counterculture, and then somebody sets fire to it? And yeah, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about a work of art and what happened to it afterwards in the context of your paper. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting case because it's a masterpiece that of Michelangelo Pistoletto, but it's really different if you pose this installation within a museum or in a public space. So in the museum, the meaning is different. No, it's a way to give a sense of beauty to the rugs. But in the public space in Naples, that has Naples has a familiarity, no, with misery and with rugs. No, you can find on the balcony in the little streets of the old city, for example. This is a little bit. It's otherwise a kind of too much a provocation, no. What you say, this kind of beauty, the Venus is a kind of is offensive for the people that in the public space have rugs as it's normal life. So I think that it's very, very important. It's not a question for me about the work of art in itself, but it's about where you pose this work of art, and the museum has a meaning, and in the public space the perception is radically different, and so it's a provocation, this Venus, this beauty, and the rugs. But it's interesting that the people, the guy that gave fire to the installation was a rug picker. A rug picker. So it was a homeless to say. At the beginning, this is the typical Neapolitan baby gang. It was a joke to give fire to this installation, but it wasn't so. It was and when police said, ask him why, I don't know, because it was offensive for me. And it was also interesting because after it was a public movement in the city, also the church, also Michelangelo Pistoletto within it, because the state gave a very strong punishment to this guy in the prison and so on, and the population was against because they understood that it was something true in this action, and this small movement won. And now this guy is on. This is also interesting. It's working in church association. The state doesn't recognize the misery separated from poverty, but the church yes, because in its history there is this distinction, no, misery and poverty.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting.
Wow, this was a super interesting explanation. I wanted to ask something different, but of course, I mean, you said a masterpiece. Is a masterpiece always a piece of the master? And is not the master mocking here the objective situation of, misery or poverty? This is a very interesting case. But my question was going back to Jamila's question regarding peuple, plebs. Of course, lumpenproletariat, we have to add probably Les Damnés, the Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And the old Marxist debate was, you have two distinctions here. One would be productive or unproductive in the process of development of productive forces, and the other one was class in itself or class in and for itself. Class with a consciousness that can be for itself, aware of itself, and then become revolutionary class in and for itself. And so if we agree that Benjamin already writes at a time when that question has passed, so it's not like Marx in 18th Primaire talks about peasants have to be represented, because they are not developing political consciousness according to their class within bourgeois society. No, it's already, Lukács, he has this kind of strange thing, the worker as the self, unconscious consciousness of the commodity, crazy construction, very speculative, but very interesting, the standpoint of the proletariat. So if we accept that the question is not anymore about consciousness, but about who can be productive for what, then I would actually agree with your distinction, so that the bets of those likes of Benjamin would be, maybe people that are maybe not conscious, that we don't need this consciousness raising critique here, but thanks to their position, and you give me the adjective, probably misery and poverty, could still do an action which is formative, constitutive of political processes, but not productive in the capitalist sense. This was also your take on the misery, right? There is something being produced regardless of, or being outside of capitalism. That's why actually the comparative, the superlative in Benjamin's formulation is tautological, no? Mm-hmm. You said misery is superlative already. It's not like more misery than the other. Yeah, it is already, as you said, so already. Okay, I get your point, and I think I can support this also. I think it's eye-opening, but the question then remains, what are these, how instructive, outside of, let's say, a reading of Benjamin, are these distinctions then? Or if we would say, there is no one who can say that what is the most productive part of society and where productivity is not. If we have the debate on surplus population, and surplus population has the function to keep salary of non-surplus population low. So there is a function indirect function. When you have said already with Baudelaire or Benjamin's take on Baudelaire, leisure has been commodified. When we have today's Geistarbeiter, like intellectual workers, we read on stupid internet that your procrastination, even though it's unproductive, is productive at the same time. So everything is productive, and productivity, I'm not making the Paolo Verno argument here, but it's difficult to locate within a certain population, as there is even a function of those who have no function, to, in a very mean manner, reiterate Adorno's point on the function of art. It's very functionlessness. Then the misère is, or the purple's function is precisely of having no function, but to keep a certain. So, but what is then the political stake? What are the political stakes of these historical distinctions in the formation, in the different levels of bourgeois society, commodifying its last, resorts, or let's say, the transition from formal to real subsumption of not only poverty but misery. So where are we then today? What are? Is it only of historical interest, or?
Okay.
I will not learn.
No, it's no. That Sami, this is the question. Of course, this is the question. I don't think that this. Activity without productivity has to remain so a pure activity in the Agambinian sense to say, but it's which kind of productivity to give to this activity. We have to remember always that also in Marx, the bohème is not only the extreme misery, but it's also, for example, the professional conspirator. For Benjamin, is within the revolt is within bohème, detective, gambler, artist, flaneur, idler. It's I think that Benjamin, but also Marx, try to identify a kind of activity without productivity. But I'm with Gramsci to pose the question about which kind of production can come from this activity. Is it possible to think a not capitalist production from this kind of activity? And the question is the political one. And come back to Gramsci quote about the history of subaltern groups. It was not clear in the slide, but what Gramsci wrote is every trace of autonomous initiative by subaltern groups then should be of inestimable value to the integral historian. That is for me the political question.
To do what?
To the integral historian. Cioè, can the bohème, the activity of bohème, take an autonomy initiative to give a kind of self-productivity to this activity? This is the political question for me. In this time, I think only in the 70s it starts to try this kind of political program. No? It's a typical program of autonomy, of course. And I can say we can find this kind of also in the slow food market, for example. No, each kind of autonomous initiative of these groups started with this idea to transform the mode of production, but at the end it's not so strong because there is in Benjamin terms no atmosphere, no general atmosphere for this kind of production. So at the end finish to be captured by capitalist mode of production. But my idea is that this kind of initially there is always an attempt to give a organization, a kind of economical organization to this activity in terms of productivity, of production. But it's too weak to resist in the global market. We can find a lot of examples today, no? Also in the recent decades. Think about the ecological sustainable agriculture and so on. At the end, this is begin to become greenwashing.
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't know. I have just scattered thoughts. One thing, since Sami mentioned the damné, again, since my memory is so bad, I had again to go back to the book and thinking that even Fanon has this very ambivalent characterization of the Lumpenproletariat. They can be, on the one hand, the best ally of the colonizer, so they can be mobilized almost as thugs. Or, on the other hand, they can be completely moved by revolutionary forces and become a pillar within the anti-colonial struggle. So, I mean, I was just because I kind of not remember. It's interesting to think that even Fanon has not a judgment like Marx, but again, the idea that there's no specific political characterization. They can go one way or the other, which does not mean that per se it's an apolitical force. It is a political category. I do agree, like the plebs, I also believe that the miserable are an agential political force that is not defined in terms of where it is located, but it's not to deprive them of any political signification. That was not the point. And now the whole thing about activity without productivity, I'm not sure I understand exactly what you have in mind when you take contemporary examples of, let's say, good examples of how a regime of activity without productivity ends up not being co-opted. Like, do you have in mind attempts, successful attempts, or not even, not looking for success, but I'm saying, what do you mean by modes of activity without productivity that somehow escape this capture? Because when you think about slow food, well, it's not what I think about it.
It's an example.
Counterculture.
Sorry, can I just add something to this? I was thinking about your example of the 70s, and there's a movie that comes to mind which is called I Dannati della Terra. It's called The Wretched of the Earth, and it was this very, very experimental film by Valentino Orsini, where it's this whole film about how do you make a film about third world struggle, right? And how can we connect, European left and what we're trying to do in the 60s with what is happening in the third world, quote unquote. And the film ends with an admission of defeat, that the film is not gonna change things. This reminded me of the question of art, like what kind of art can we produce? And maybe like the question is, like this example seems to suggest that art is being rejected, right? I don't know, maybe there's other interpretations of what's happening here, but that film again is saying the whole purpose of the film is to create a militant audience rather than the film itself, right? So it's saying, okay, so we've done all the work on aesthetics, on art, on the changing of consciousness through art, but now it's your turn. This is now your baby. Like, the revolution cannot happen inside the film. I'm not sure that I'm answering the question, but there's something there about how do you escape capture. But in the film, it's the director who sort of relinquishes that. And it's just so striking, this image of the burning of the artwork, right? Like, this is supposed to be a sort of glorification of the legendary past of Naples or the present of Naples, and then the very people who it's supposed to represent burn it. That's just so symbolic to me of how it cannot be captured, in fact. I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you so much. In the beginning, I was also going to ask a question similar to Jamila's, because I also thought of Hegel's rebel, and I remember that Hegel actually has a conception of the rich rebel. So it's actually not connected to poverty, but this kind of indolence of not integrating into the world of productive work, etc. And maybe, so this would be similar, but with the opposite normative evaluation of this. So being outside of the system would be good, instead of, like for Hegel, being like this morally depraved class that can be either poor or rich. But then I was also thinking, so I just wanted to make this point that for Hegel, the rebel can be the rich rebel, can be rich as well. And I have 2 points that came up. One is about the etymology of the miser. I'm always very intrigued about this change where miserable and misery in English became more a synonym of sadness, and so just wondering if you came up with any reflections about this. But I think it also points in the direction that you were saying, that it's not an economic category but has an affective dimension to it. And lastly, I was also thinking about a movie. I think in English it was translated as it's Ladri di Biciclette. And I really, I saw an English translation of the title that is bicycle thief in the singular. And I think it misses completely the point, because the movie is entirely about a guy that has a job, but to do it, it's Vittorio De Sica, Italian neorealism. And so the guy has a job, but to do the job, he has to have a bike, and someone steals his bike. So the whole movie looking to remedy this, and in the end, he ends up stealing someone else's bike. And in order to be able to work, but he gets caught and gets humiliated in front of his son. It's horrible. And when you see the title and it's in the plural, it gives another meaning to the movie, because it's not about this guy that is a thief, but it's a whole system that creates this class of thieves that are not thieves by nature, but they're put in this position. And I think the movie illustrates very well the change of class, so to speak, between the miser and the pauper, so to speak. So you have the worker and the thief, but the worker becomes a thief and the thief becomes a worker. So you don't have this absolute miser that you mentioned in the Roman case. Yeah, just some thoughts about.
Thank you. That I try to answer, but very, very briefly. I think that in the West world there is no chance in this moment for recognizing this kind of activity without productivity. Because we are, I can give a lot of examples. Precariat, West precariat, for example, they don't find in the state a kind, in the state market, in the national market, a position. They try to bring, to receive funds, financiation from the global market. But in this way, it was the situation of Baudelaire in some sense. No, Baudelaire doesn't want to be involved in the national citizenship, in the bourgeoisie citizenship. And so he finds that the only way for a recognition of his poetry, of his form of life, in the market. So the market saved Baudelaire from the bourgeoisie citizenship. And I think that in the West we are in the same situation. It's if I know a lot of people that they find to go on with her activity, but at the end they have to adapt themselves to the neoliberal market. So we have no alternative in this moment in the West. I think more about the South or the Northwest world. No, there is maybe more room for something else. For example, of course, it's very important to maybe to also to read again, for example, the book of Gibson Graham on the alternative economy, thinking about the 70s. No, of course, but now I don't think that we can apply this alternative economy to the West world, because I don't think that really there is no alternative. Sometimes the market is really the alternative to poverty in your country, no? And I think also to academic job, for example, no? If you can find a position in the universities of your country, you have to apply for the neoliberal academic market. And I think that we are maybe in the same condition, but it's not so different from Baudelaire condition. So I think that the 70s is for us what was for Baudelaire the 1848 movement. A chance that is failed, but I don't see now in the West the something that is growing up in the sense of an alternative to the we have nationalism, neo-sovereignism in the States, and the neoliberal market outside. It's of course it's complementary, so there is no alternative. And of course, there was this La di Biciclette is a film, a movie on the misery, no? Of this situation of emarginate people, marginalized people, no? That in the Italy after the World War, the Second World War. So this kind of and also the bicycle is a symbol of this activity. No, it's a movement. It's something that is not. That is moving, no? It's a kind of activity, and but it's this kind. But at the end, all this world was captured within the economic boom of the 60s. So it's also a way. I don't know if I repeat myself. I don't know if now it's the real chance for a revolution from the point of view of misery, but maybe it could be a kind of criticism of a way of a mode of capturing the mode of in the mode of production of this kind of activity. And it's a real problem. The translation of miseria in English, I have some difficulties, for example, because I understand that misery is something else. But it's interesting also that misery is related more to a moral or psychological field. But this is something that is produced with the separation with poverty. No, so there is no, and it's also interesting because you said about Hegel. It's always the same now. The misery, the miserable, is a transversal condition, not related to the poverty, but rich people. There is a misery of rich people in a psychological, moral sense. So it's a kind of trace of this separation in the modernity between poverty and misery. But the question is that it's also the misery in this transversal sense, non-economic sense, is much more related with a kind of non-activity, inactivity, not that is condemned to be inactive. So sometimes it's more rich people to be miserable because they don't need to work, not to live.
sorry, I'm still thinking about the 70s because all these examples are coming to mind. What do you make of figures like these millionaires like Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli and these people who, and also someone like Giovanni Pirelli, who they were coming from very, very rich industrialist families in Italy, and they contributed so much to actually funding revolutionary movements. And I was reminded of when you were saying the rich rebel, I was thinking about that contradiction in terms, I mean, one reading of it is they reject their entire, historical identity by saying, I reject you, I reject my industrialist family, I reject the role that has been given to me in society. But of course they have the luxury to do that, right? They have the luxury to say, no, I'm not going to take on the family business and I'm going to fund various groups, including FLN and others. I was wondering what you made of, again, it's the 70s
but
when this is happening.
Yeah, but of course, Feltrinelli, but it's people in, we can say, in very active revolutionary position. But I think more about Olivetti. He tried to build a new kind of company, the Olivetti, that was in competition with the United States computer developing, and Olivetti tried to define a very different mode of production. But at the end, it happened what happened with today also. United States market destroyed these alternatives to production. And I know that a friend of us, Daniele Balico, studied this Olivetti style, and in the 70s until the 80s, 60s, 70s, the Olivetti research on computer was more forward than the United States research. But it was a kind of silent war, and at the end, the powerful. No, we are in the Cold War, won the United States. But there is a lot of story like this of possible alternatives of mode of production, but also of work organization. And we can also visit now in Ivrea, in northern Italy, the Olivetti fabric. And it's interesting how the work was organized with a lot of autonomous position of workers.
But you wouldn't say that Olivetti is a rebel in the sense that it's still an entrepreneur who's trying to experiment with completely different model of creating a factory, but it's a different figure. Like I wouldn't locate it on the side of the Misro.
Not directly
not because he
him.
has money, but in the sense that his project is somehow connected to work, connected to productivity, although experimenting different strategies for producing and for organizing labor.
Yeah, of course. No. It was it's not directly the figure of Olivetti, but it was a kind of work organization in which there is room for activity without productivity. It was conceived in this way.
Yeah. But without profit? Sorry, just to make it clear.
No, with profit, in the sense that Olivetti was a company, but then
A company.
how to understand the organization of labor. What does it mean to organize a factory differently as compared to, let's say, the 40s assembly lines, since you're building computer? How do you do that? And that was experimental and pioneeristic and quite radical. But then I was saying, you mentioned Feltrinelli more as sort of political mecenas.
Yeah, I mean, he was somebody.
Yeah.
But then to me, then it comes to maybe it's not very interesting. But then of course. You can think of radical politics as an activity without productivity, but that doesn't really respond to the search of activities that are also economic activity without productivity, right? Because of course there are activity that may somehow, although not totally escape capture, but not be production oriented. and not even being reproduction oriented. Because of course, if we think of activity that are not immediately productive, then we ended up into the mare magnum of reproduction, which is still labor, as Italian Marxist family taught us.
What is available is production, activity without production. If you think about algorithmic capitalism or data capitalism, no? We produce value from an activity that is not productive. No? We stay on smartphone, on apps to give our dates.
The link, no? The production and what creates value is delinked, no? And that would be a very interesting trajectory of which otherwise you would have maybe fantasies like Hannah Arendt's Vita Activa, activity which is not part of, bad, what she calls.
But for Benjamin, the challenge was to put together not only Revolt and Revolution, but also Fourier and Marx.
Yes.
So,
but then you could also say the ultimate Benjamin, not solution, but conclusion from it, is the arcades itself. It would be not to look for productivity outside of value production, but go precisely where value used to be. It's still productive, but where value has left. Value has left to non-production, which is capital producing, so to speak, or yielding capital. And then you have all these outdated modes of production, which used to be productive, are still productive, but not in the capitalist sense. So then it becomes more backwarded, which can be generative of a new future. But it would, I'm not saying steampunk, but it goes to
cyberpunk or something.
Cyberpunk, but also some retro. Why is the obsession with retro culture a lot? And then many people would say that the highest form of productivity of Western Fordism was reached the peak in the mid-80s. So that's why machines of the mid-80s mechanically still work. They were productive and highly on a high level. Today, machines are produced for maximum 5 years, and you throw them away because capital needs shorter the turnovers of profit rate within production-reproduction cycle. So it means that the question of productivity is not interesting more for capital reproduction because we're living in financial capitalism. Of course, this is in the past. So Benjamin's points regarding the arcades might not be so outdated because many of us in our at least the least bourgeois interior live still outdated life form, which is mainly look at your clothes, or at least what you like to wear, also your interiors, mostly mid-80s. Early 90s is the end. But seriously, with the durability of things, fine mechanics also, especially in Europe, this has moved, and also the durability is on purpose shorter because you are supposed to buy other things. So productivity can also produce trash, and that's is this productivity, no? Productivity, I understand you correctly, is always linked here to the value form of capital. And so capital maybe has emancipated itself from the old fantasy of productivity, or you may call the use value dimension of the commodity. And that's actually bad news and good news at the same time. If you think Benjamin's take on the Arcades project was precisely to focus on an outdated capitalist, not even productive. It was to exhibit commodities.
Exactly.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. No, this is the exhibition value that Benjamin recognized in the Baudelaire figure. Yeah. Benjamin understood already that it was a production of value beyond the production of commodities. Of course. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.